Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Between the 20s, the official sports podcast of the Chicago Sports Business Association. On today's episode, we're going to start with some news, and then we'll have a new segment called Panic Attack, where we rate 10 players based on how concerned we are after some slow starts. I'm Amer, and as usual, I'm joined by Mike and Bryce. How you boys doing?
I am doing well. Better in fantasy baseball than fantasy football, so not sure exactly how much you should take my advice this week. But yeah, let's see how week 4 goes. Hopefully it'll turn around for me.
I'm good. I'm excited the Giants finally have a quarterback. Daniel Jones, the guy runs for 2 touchdowns. Eli Manning ran for 7 in his career. I'm excited. It's a new era of Giant football for Big Blue in New York. It's going to be a good 2 decades of Daniel Jones.
All right, it's been 1 week. We got to chill out on Daniel Jones a bit. Feeling a little bit like the Baker hype right now, but sounds like we're ready to move into the episode. Let's get it. So, starting off, we got some news that actually just broke a couple hours ago. It's Melvin Gordon. Looks like he's going to report on Thursday, the 26th, and he won't be a go for this weekend's games, but looks like he'll be in the lineup in week 5. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's definitely disappointing news for Eckler fans, but really good news for those who decided to take a risk on Gordon in the draft. I think going forward, for the first 2 weeks there, you're going to see how many carries Gordon gets and how much Eckler's value goes down. But in general, I do think that Gordon will pretty much be the starter from here on out in your fantasy lineup, whereas Eckler will probably be relegated to the bench.
Yeah, I think Melvin Gordon is probably a must start once he comes back. Austin Eckler, at best, is going to be a flex option depending on what you anticipate game script. And Justin Jackson, that's the other one. Justin Jackson's, I think, droppable. He's the 3rd option on this team now. He was already playing second fiddle behind Austin Eckler by a pretty wide margin at that anyway. And with Melvin Gordon back, he's not going to get that many touches. Sucks for Eckler owners and Justin Jackson owners. You can cut him loose to the waiver wire.
Yeah, I think pretty much agree with you guys. Melvin Gordon's going to be a must start as soon as he comes back. Definitely a top 10 guy once he comes back. If you remember, he had a really good season last year, and if you didn't have any holdout concerns for the draft, he would have been probably a top 5 running back off the board this year. So money in the bank moving forward with Melvin Gordon. If he doesn't get hurt, we'll see what kind of shape he's in once he reports to the Chargers. But if all goes well, then high upside for this guy.
So if theoretically down the line, if he if he does play week 5, are you penciling him in your starting lineup if you own him?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, at least RB2.
I agree. He's clearly going to be a top 20 guy if he plays in week 5. I'd say probably temper expectations. He might not be top 5, top 10, but definitely should start him.
If you want a point of reference, Ezekiel Elliott played on a pitch count or a snap count week 1 against the Giants. He still finished as a inside the top 24 running backs. Melvin Gordon's going to come in with a full week of practice. He'll be better and have more touches. Speaking of top-tier running backs, some now unfortunate news. Saquon Barkley left the game against the Buccaneers early with a high ankle sprain. It is now announced that he'll be missing 4 to 8 weeks, more likely 6 to 8 weeks. This is crushing for fantasy owners that use their early first-round pick on Saquon Barkley. What do you guys think about the impact of Saquon Barkley's absence for other Giants? And what do you guys think about Wayne Gallman moving forward?
Yeah, I think Wayne Gallman is definitely someone you can target on the waiver wire. I don't necessarily think that he's absolutely a plug and play at this point, but I do think that with the insertion of Daniel Jones into this lineup, the offense can be a lot more electric. And if it is, that means that Gallman could see, just by the nature of the offense really moving, a lot of carries and a lot of yards and hopefully a lot of short receptions for those in the PPR leagues.
Yeah, Gallman's, of course, not even close to as talented as Saquon Barkley. There aren't many people that are. So I don't think he's a great option moving forward. I think I would maybe take a week, see how the Giants offense looks without Saquon Barkley, see if maybe a different guy emerges in that backfield or if they decide to throw more. So for this week, I would not start Wayne Gallman, but I do think he's a good pickup and he does have some high upside.
I agree. I wouldn't start him. He is in my top 3 waiver wire pickups this week. He should be number 1 for Saquon Barkley owners, just because now you're guaranteed to have a hole on your roster. Other than that, though, if you don't need a running back, I would still sooner take a guy like Philip Dorsett, who is now elevating to wide receiver 2 status in that Patriots system, not wide receiver 2, fantasy-wise, the second option for Tom Brady. I take him over Gallman unless you own Saquon Barkley.
Yeah, but just the Giants are playing the Redskins this week, so that probably is an attractive choice. I don't know if you necessarily want to start him, but if your lineup is looking weak and you have an extra flex spot, I'd say maybe you might want to consider it.
Maybe the Redskin run defense. The Redskin run defense isn't terrible. I mean, they have Daron Payne in the middle, who's just a stopper. Landon Collins plays in the box a lot. I think this is going to look more like a passing game for the Giants. And as Amir alluded to earlier, Wayne Gallman is not nearly as talented as Saquon Barkley is.
All right, so now we're moving on to our new segment, Panic Attack. We're starting off with Mike. Who you got?
Yeah, so we have one quarterback on our Panic Attack list this week. Baker Mayfield of the Browns. Been a bit of a shaky start for the very, very hyped up Browns coming to this season. What do you guys think?
In terms of Baker Mayfield, I think he will get better this season, but I think with all this depth at quarterback and all the other great options you have at quarterback, I actually think I'm pretty concerned about Baker Mayfield. I am up high at like a 6 or a 7 on my concern list out of 1 out of 10. So I think I'm okay with dropping Baker Mayfield. Just definitely depending on what else is on your waiver wire. I think maybe for Daniel Jones, I think I'd probably take Daniel Jones moving forward until we see something from Baker.
I'm like an 8 or an 8.5. I'm very concerned about Baker. The accuracy, that's his calling card. It hasn't been that good. A lot of interceptions. If you watched any of the Browns games these last 3 weeks, he's missed open receivers a lot, particularly on the sideline. He had a couple touchdowns against the Jets, but one of those was a 10-yard slant that he threw to Odell Beckham Jr., and OBJ ran for 80 yards. That's not on Baker at all. I'm concerned about him. David Njoku is out for an extended period of time. That's going to be another option that he doesn't have. Absolutely do not start him. I have him outside my top 12 quarterbacks. I'd still probably roster him because he does have that hype. He is in an electric offense, or what should be an electric offense, and he has probably the best receiver in football athletically anyway, in Odell Beckham, so he should be rostered, but I would not start him.
Yeah, I think I'm a little less panicked than you guys. I'm going to put him at a 4 on my panic meter. I think that there was a lot of hype on this offense coming in, but you have to remember, it's like LeBron when he went to the Heat at first. They got to gel a little bit. They really have to sort things out a little bit. I have faith in Freddie Kitchens to put this team together a little bit, at least from an offensive standpoint. I think that he and Odell are still developing a little bit. Odell hasn't quite risen to that wide receiver 1 territory yet. He's still, just in terms of points, I think he's 16th or 17th in terms of half PPR scoring at the wide receiver position. So I think there is much more upside from Beckham. You still have a dynamic Jarvis Landry on the other side of the on the other side of the field. So I'm not that worried about Baker Mayfield. I do think that if you find a better quarterback on the waiver wire, put them into your lineup for a given week. But in the long run, I think that dropping Baker Mayfield would be a mistake.
All right, sounds good. Looks like we're moving down to the running backs now, and first up we have James Conner.
Yeah, I'm hitting the panic button pretty hard with James Conner. I'm going to go up to a 7, just because this offense really hasn't brought much so far. Conner's been 30th in terms of running backs and half PPR format and scoring so far this year in terms of average points per week. And, I mean, they have Mason Rudolph now under center, which it's just a very scary situation. Antonio Brown is gone. This offense is much less fortuitous than it was last year.
Mike, I'm a little cooler than you are. I'm going to be a 4 on this, maybe a 5. It's really, for me, talk to me after this week. If you look at James Conner's first 3 weeks, in New England, week 1, hosting Seattle, in San Francisco. Those are 3 fairly good front sevens. The Seahawks might have the best linebacking core in the NFL. We always know that Bill Belichick defenses are staunch against the run. It's tough sledding, and the Niners were stacking the box against him because Mason Rudolph is in there and not Ben Roethlisberger. Still, in full PPR formats, he's the number 25 running back, which, all things considered, is respectable given how he's looked and how the offense has looked. If he does this same thing again this week against the Bengals in prime time, then you can double that and put me up to an 8 or a 9. If he doesn't produce against a bad offense where the Steelers should absolutely win handily, even with Mason Rudolph, then I'll be concerned.
Yeah, I think I'm closer to Mike on this one. I think I'm right with Mike. Actually, I think a 7's pretty good number for the panic button with James Conner. I am concerned about this offense. I think without Big Ben, of course, without Antonio Brown, they're just not as good as they were last year, and so a lot of people are going to be keying in on James Conner. I know you mentioned the stacked box in San Francisco. I don't really think that that's going to change much. I think with most games that these Steelers play, I think a lot of teams are going to stack the box and try to stop James Conner and make Mason Rudolph beat them. And I think along with that just comes the game script. I don't think the Steelers are going to be ahead in a lot of games, and so I don't think Conner is going to really be getting a lot of rushes. So I think I'm concerned about him finishing where he was drafted, definitely, and even inside the top 10, 15 running backs for this season.
All right. Now moving on to our second running back, staying in the AFC North. Bengal running back who will be going up against James Conner this week in prime time, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon, remember, had that injury in the early weeks. Came back, should be fully healthy now. Is the number 34 RB in full PPR formats. What do you guys think about him? How concerned are you?
So yeah, just with Joe Mixon, he was injured at the beginning of the season, so he did first 2 weeks were a slow start. And Seattle and San Francisco, as Bryce just said, have shown to be pretty solid defenses so far. So that kind of explains his first 2 weeks that were pretty off. But he did come back against Buffalo this past week, which is good news because Buffalo does have a pretty solid defense. And he looked healthy. He ran pretty well. He got 15 carries, and he did have a touchdown reception. So my concern on Joe Mixon is at about a 3 or a 4. I think they're going to lean on him more now that he's fully healthy, and I am not too concerned about Joe Mixon.
I'm a little bit more concerned. I'm going to go 5 just because I really question the Bengals offense. The game script is going to be against them a lot. I think A.J. Green coming back won't necessarily benefit them all that much. So I'm just kind of going to leave it at a 5 with Joe Mixon, but I don't really see what value you could really get for him in the trade market at this point. So I'd still say you're probably just going to wind up stashing him.
Mike, I'm probably a little closer to Amer on this one. Actually, I'm as low as you can go. I'm a 1. I'm not really concerned about Joe Mixon at all. He had 2 slow games against Seattle and San Francisco in the first 2 weeks. Again, a lot of that was hampered by an injury that he sustained week 1. Amer, you mentioned it, came up with a big week against Buffalo. Mike, you mentioned game script. The game script in this game against Buffalo was almost entirely negative. The Bengals were shut out until the fourth quarter, and Mixon still had 15 carries and 2 catches. So he's going to be involved in the offense. He had 61 rushing yards. That's a little over 4 rushing yards per carry. If you guys remember, I was a little bit lower on him than you guys were in our ranking show, the very first show that we did. So based on where I had him there, I'm not as concerned. I think he is a serviceable RB2 moving forward, if healthy.
Now, next on our list here is Chris Carson of the Seahawks. So far, it's been a bit of a shaky year for Carson. He had fumble issues in his most recent game, and CJ Prosise saw a good amount of action. How are you guys feeling about Chris Carson?
10. I don't think there is any player in fantasy football right now more concerning than Chris Carson. He has fumbling issues just everywhere, can't hold on to the ball. The only reason I think that he's maintained his starting job for now is because Rashad Penny is hurt. Rashad Penny has looked pretty good. When he's back and healthy, he'll get more touches. Russell Wilson threw the ball very well last week, ran the ball well last week. I'm very concerned about Chris Carson, and I feel it's somewhat vindicated being down on him for most of the season, and now it's somewhat coming to fruition.
Yeah, see, I'm honestly the exact opposite as you. I have him at a 1 or a 2. I am not very concerned about Chris Carson. I think this fumbling issue I don't think it's a big issue. I think it has happened in the past 2 games, but it is an aberration. He didn't fumble in college. He didn't fumble in his early seasons in the NFL. So I think this is a little bit of a fluke early on. And I don't think CJ Procise is even close to Chris Carson in terms of talent. So I don't think Procise is going to be a competition for Chris Carson. So I think Chris Carson is going to be just fine. I would say he's at a 2 instead of a 1, just because his targets have gone down since the first week. We were all pretty excited that he had 7 targets in week 1, but since then I think he's had 5 in the past 2 weeks combined. So not great on the passing front, but I think these past 2 weeks are a little bit more of a fluke than what we're going to see for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree with Amir. I'm gonna go 1 actually. I'm not very concerned about Chris Carson at all. I think these fumble issues, as Amir said, will really pass in the long run. He's been very good against the stack box last year. He was fantastic against it. He saw it more than anyone else and was extremely productive. I think he saw something like 58% of his rushes were against the stack box. So I really have faith in Carson to come back. In addition to that, it seems like the Seattle passing game is sort of up and running a little bit. Tyler Lockett is getting more active. So that offense is sort of at least beginning to come together a little bit. So I'd have to go 1 on Chris Carson.
All right, so moving on, we have a New England Patriot running back. My team, we have Sony Michel.
Sony Michel of the Pats, I'm going to go 3. I'm not very concerned about Michel going forward. I think that the Pats always run the ball quite consistently, and I really don't see anyone really making a run at Michel's carries. And I also think that the Patriots are going to be up a lot in most of their games. So that definitely favors Michel in terms of game script.
I'm going to say 7. For me, it's the question of efficiency. In week 1 against Pittsburgh, 15 rushes, 14 yards. In week 3 against the Jets, 9 rushes, 11 yards. That's now 2 weeks of just brutal rushing efficiency. The only thing that saved him this week was a rushing touchdown. He's only received 1 target this season. That's not in an individual week. That's this season. He's received 1 target. He's not active in the passing game at all. Rex Burkhead has looked pretty good. And the only game that Michel was above 10 points on in PPR formats, week 2, but that was against Miami, and you can't count anything against Miami this year.
Yeah, I'm with Bryce. This Sony Michel is very concerning as a fantasy owner. I have him up at a 9 for me. So big concerns about Sony Michel. You just don't really know what you're going to get with him. He had 9 carries last week, even though they were up big on the Jets. So it doesn't look like game script is really helping him, or you can't really predict how many carries he's going to get based on the game script. So I just think he's extremely touchdown dependent. I'm pretty concerned about that. Rex Burkhead and James White have both looked really good so far early in this season, and the Patriots have been throwing a little bit more than I expected so far. So I'm pretty concerned about Sony Michel. I think he's very touchdown dependent, but I do think he's a talented guy. He's a first-round pick, so he might come back. He might kind of start getting better as the season progresses, but I am pretty concerned about Sony Michel.
Moving into the wide receivers now, one of the more concerning guys that we've been talking about on the podcast for the last couple weeks, Stefon Diggs, wide receiver in Minnesota. Obviously, Kirk Cousins is not throwing the ball very much. Adam Thielen is getting the majority of these targets. What do you guys feel about Stefon Diggs? Should you start him? Should you trade him? Should you drop him?
I'm going to go with a 4 on panicking on Stefon Diggs. I have Diggs in a bunch of leagues. He's sort of relegated to the flex bench position, depending on his matchup in a week to week, I think. Because honestly, he hasn't seen that many targets in the passing game, and the Vikings have been passing that often. But with that said, their offense has been very good. Dalvin Cook's been carrying the running game. And I think as teams will begin to adjust later in the season, sort of trying to limit Dalvin Cook, that'll open up the passing game a little bit more, and then you'll have Diggs and Thielen really, really producing at a high level. So I would absolutely hold on to him if you have him. I think that it can only go up from here for Stefon Diggs after a very concerning first 3 games.
Yeah, I am pretty panicked. You're right about it can only go up from here for Stefon Diggs. I'm at a 6 or a 7 for Stefon Diggs just because this offense is not what we expected. We were last year they were throwing a bunch, but this year they're one of the most run heavy teams, especially with Dalvin Cook carrying the ball the way he is. He's just been a beast so far. So they've really moved away from the pass, and that's really hurt Stefon Diggs and Adam Thielen. So both of these guys I'm concerned about, and I think Stefon Diggs is not startable for a while. He's definitely outside my top 20 wide receivers moving forward. And unless we see some more passing or some defenses kind of key in on the running game against Minnesota, I don't think Stefon Diggs will come close to where we were drafting him within that 12 to 15 wide receiver range.
I'm a little bit closer to Mike on this one. I have Stefon Diggs at a 3. I really just think Dalvin Cook has been amazing, and we talked about that several times in some of the earlier shows. I'm very happy about that. I have him in multiple leagues. But I really think Diggs has just been a casualty of game script. If you look at what they've done the first 3 weeks, against Atlanta, they were up big early and just pounded the ball. He also was coming into week 1 with a hamstring injury. He only had 2 targets that game. Last week against Oakland, he only had 3 targets, 3 catches, 2 for 15 yards. But they were up 21-0 on the Raiders within the first 20 minutes of this game. That is negative game script for him. If you look at the only game where the Vikings have had neutral or positive game script, which was week 2 against Green Bay, Stefon Diggs had 7 targets. That is right around where he should be, or at least where you drafted him where he should be. Yes, he only had 1 catch. That catch did go for a touchdown. He also had a couple drops, which is concerning. But he also had another touchdown reception called back on a phantom PI call on Dalvin Cook on a pick play. I just think Stefon Diggs is due for a turnaround. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to be the next couple weeks. Very tough matchup against Chicago this week. And then week 5, they go play the Giants. That's going to be positive game script. Dalvin Cook is going to have 400 yards rushing. So I think it's a matter of time before Stefon Diggs starts to come around and the Vikings passing offense starts to come around. But I wouldn't start him, but I also wouldn't trade him. I was offered Allen Robinson for him, and I didn't take it. Robinson has his own issues too with Mitchell Trubisky, but I'd rather have a guy with more upside like Stefon Diggs if you're talking about a wide receiver 3.
All right, next up we have Robert Woods of the Los Angeles Rams. Woods has been a solid receiver for a bunch of years leading up to this one, but his target share seems to be diminishing when compared to Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks in that offense. Boys, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Robert Woods has had a slow, as you said, a slow start. He had a great week 1. He got a ton of targets. I think he got double-digit targets in week 1. But since then, it's been rough sailing for him. But my concern is not too much with Robert Woods. I think I'm down at about a 3. I just think this offense is going to get better. They have really struggled early on, kind of picked up more on how they played in the Super Bowl and not the rest of the season last year. So I think the Rams are going to get better. I think Jared Goff has struggled a lot this season, which is a big factor in Robert Woods' struggles as well. So I think Jared Goff is going to improve this season, and I think I'm not too concerned about Robert Woods.
I agree with you, Amir. I'm a 2 or a 3 on Robert Woods. Target share is last week against Cleveland, 8 targets. And rare for him, he only hauled in 3 receptions. So for all the mathematicians in the room, that's under 50%. That's not what we're used to with Robert Woods. It's tough to feed 3 mouths. Cooper Kupp is Jared Goff's guy, particularly in the red zone. Brandon Cooks is the deep threat. There's always going to be a place for Robert Woods in this offense. I'm not concerned. I think this is just a 2-week little blip on the radar. And if he gets 8 targets every week, I'd more expect him to have 5 catches, 60 or 70 yards, and a touchdown about every other week, should he get those targets.
Gotta love Bryce's multidisciplinary comments. He's not only doing math with you, but he's also feeding, cooking. It's all good when Bryce talks. But Robert Woods, I'm going to go down to about a 4. They faced very tough defenses so far in Carolina, New Orleans, and Cleveland. So with that, I think that he will get a little bit more of the target share going forward. We have seen, despite the fact that they play these tough defenses, players like Cooper Kupp get a lot of targets and a lot of yards and a lot of fantasy points. And as Bryce said, he was targeted 8 times last week, but only hauled in 3 passes. They tried to feed the mouths, and they tried to feed Robert Woods. He just couldn't haul in the catches because he had butterfingers. Spent too much time in the kitchen.
All right, looks like we all pretty much agree on Robert Woods. Not too concerned there. But moving on to our final wide receiver, we have Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, I'm going to go to 6 on Juju. The thing that's obviously concerning here is Ben is out. This offense has been much less dynamic than they were last year. Big problems for Pittsburgh so far. I'm pretty concerned about Juju going forward, but at the same time, I mean, somebody has to get the targets in that offense. So even if he's not necessarily like piling up these huge games because the offense is moving very well, I do think that he will still see his fair share of targets going forward, and he's still the number 1 wide receiver on that team. However, I definitely don't think he's a number 1 wide receiver in terms of fantasy. Probably wide receiver 2, maybe even flex going forward. At least until he shows us better.
I'm going to say 7.5. Mike, you alluded to it here. This panic isn't really about panicking about Juju being a starter or not. It's about the guy was a borderline first-round pick in some leagues. Juju, you drafted him as your wide receiver 1. I don't think he has that capacity anymore. Probably more in the wide receiver 15 to 18 range, like those mid-tier wide receiver 2s. Mason Rudolph is better than people, I think, give him credit for. He's thrown the deep ball very well. What's concerning about Juju, to me, is going to be efficiency. Yes, he had a 76-yard touchdown last week that he basically did by himself. It was a short pass that he took to the house. If you take out that 76-yard touchdown catch, he had 2 catches for 5 yards. That's not good, and that's not what you're looking for out of a top-tier receiver, not what you're looking for out of a wide receiver 1. I'm concerned about him moving forward because everybody can key in on him a little bit more with James Conner underperforming. If Conner gets going, so if we go back to what we talked about with James Conner, if he has a better week against Cincy, it'll also help Juju. So these guys are going to work in tandem, I think, with one another.
Yeah, I think I'm right around where you guys are with Juju. I think at 7 on the panic meter is pretty much where I'm at. He is obviously down as quarterback. Mason Rudolph is pretty unproven at this point. And a lot of the defense is pretty much going to key in on him because he's the only target in Pittsburgh. So I do have concerns there. I think his upside compared to what we thought his upside would be before the draft is much, much lower than we thought. But I think his floor is still there. He's going to have a lot of volume, a lot of targets, a lot of receptions. So not too concerned about his floor, but his upside is definitely outside the top 10 for me. I think he's between 10 and 18 or maybe 12 and 18 in terms of wide receivers moving forward.
Now on to our final position. We have tight ends, and we'll start here with George Kittle, the tight end in San Francisco. Came in as a top 3 tight end in just about every league. I saw him taken in the 2nd or the 3rd round. That's a high draft capital. He hasn't really lived up to that billing recently. What do you guys think about George Kittle? Is he going to recover?
Well, first of all, I'm a little disappointed we're not doing defenses and kickers, but I guess moving on from that, something that's going to be that you have to understand, I think, when doing these tight end rankings, we have Kittle here and OJ Howard next, which we'll get to. But I mean, I'm panicking about George Kittle, but I'm not panicking because he's sort of not producing. I'm panicking because he's not producing at the level that I expected if I drafted George Kittle. Because if you drafted George Kittle, you spent a lot of draft capital on him. I mean, we're talking maybe 3rd, 4th round value because people thought that he was going to be one of these elite tight ends. And so far this year, he hasn't been too bad. I mean, he's received 10 targets in week 1, put up basically 13 PPR points. Second week, three targets, still 8 points in PPR. And then last week, basically 12 PPR points on 8 targets, which to me, that isn't very concerning. But for where you drafted him, I'd start getting worried. But with that in mind, you're not going to receive back what you drafted George Kittle for because nobody is really out there that's going to willing to pay a high price for George Kittle. I think on the panic meter, I'm going to be about a 5 based on draft cap, but that isn't the same as a 5 on a sort of a late round flyer. I'm panicked just because I'm worried I'm not going to get back what I drafted him at least before the season started.
Yeah, I guess I see that point about this disparity in his production so far and where you drafted him. But for me, my concern with George Kittle is a 1 or a 0. I think he's still the target leader in San Francisco.
1 to 10 scale. 1 to 10 scale. Come on.
All right, then
No
it's
zeros.
a 1. In that case, still he's the number 1 target in San Francisco. He's still a beast after the catch, which he was last year. And he's had a couple touchdowns called back, so that has kind of capped his upside so far. But I think nothing to worry about with George Kittle. Still a clear elite tight end for me. As little concern as possible from my end on George Kittle.
I'm going to split the difference between you guys with a slight lean towards Mike. 3.5 for George Kittle. I think he's been a victim of game script against Tampa and Pittsburgh. Against Tampa, Cincinnati, just crushed them, especially the Cincinnati game. They didn't have to throw. And remember, they do have 4 running backs on that team, 3 now with Tevin Coleman out. But he had 3 targets. He still turned in 54 yards against Cincinnati. Mike, I think you hit the nail on the head, though. The concern is not about George Kittle. He's going to get his 50 yards minimum. He'll hopefully get some more work in the red zone. He'll hopefully have touchdowns not called back, as Amer said. But he's been a respectable tight end. He's tight end 10 across PPR formats, but that's not where you drafted him. Guys like Austin Hooper, guys like Will Dissly, Darren Waller, who was a waiver wire pickup in almost every league.
Yes, Waller.
They've been better this season than George Kittle. I think it'll turn around for him. I do. He's too good for it not to turn around. He's had too much success, particularly against Tampa. Amer, you hit it. The 2 touchdowns called back. That's just dumb luck. I think that'll turn around for him. He'll eventually shoot up to hopefully tight end 6 or higher. But with guys like Will Dissly and Darren Waller, he's concerning because he might not be that top-tier tight end that you thought he was, but he at least will be a serviceable tight end 1 every single week, except this week when he has a bye.
Yeah, definitely. If you've gone a long way still from that guy asking me, who the hell is that when I drafted Darren Waller to now. But, man, I'm laughing, even though I'm 0-3 in that league. But such is life.
He's been unbelievable,
I know,
Mike. He's the top target
very
there.
happy with that late-round pick. The only reason I didn't pick him in another league is because there's a huge Raiders fan who just takes every Raider. And yet that person has won the league at least 2 or 3 times. Quite crazy.
That's impossible.
Bryce, you see, you shouldn't be that proud about being good at this thing. But anyway, moving on to our final player in the panic attack segment of the show, O.J. Howard, tight end for the Bucs, highlighted his campaign so far with 0 points in week 2. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'm concerned about O.J. Howard, definitely. I'm up at an 8 with this guy. It's just tough to trust him so far. He's had 7 receptions on the season so far, which is pretty brutal. He had fumbling issues in week 1, and he hasn't scored a touchdown. We saw a lot of Cameron Brate in the red zone. So I'm not too sure what to think of O.J. Howard. I'm pretty scared, especially seeing as we drafted him as the tight end 4. I think it's pretty clear that Chris Godwin is the number 2 in this offense in terms of targets. So my concern for O.J. Howard is pretty high.
I'm going to preface this with I was wrong. Amer, you're right. Chris Godwin is 2. O.J. Howard is not 2. I was, from the very first ranking show, I was gung-ho. O.J. Howard is 2. Chris Godwin is 3. Not the case. Chris Godwin is 2. O.J. Howard is 3, maybe even 4 behind Rashad Perriman. That being said, I'm at like a 6 on him, so fairly concerned. But he's not. I wouldn't drop him. He has too much upside. You invested too much draft capital in him to drop him. And I think week 3 was actually it wasn't great. It was 3 catches, 66 yards, not a lot of red zone work, only 4 targets. But that's still a bright spot.
Who'd they play, Bryce? Who'd they play?
They played the Giants, but this wasn't positive game script for him for most of this game. the Buccaneers were up until Danny Dimes took off in the second half. And the other thing I wanted to mention, he had 4 targets. He had 5 if you count the PI that was against him. And that was like a 60-yard bomb from Jameis Winston. I think they're going to use him a little bit more. I really hope Bruce Arians sees the talent in him. He's on the field a lot, which is good. He's just not running passing patterns. He's being used as a blocker. So at least he's got a high snap count. At least he's on the field. But I wouldn't start him, but I wouldn't drop him.
Yeah, if only blocks counted for fantasy points.
I think I could take the top off the Giants' defensive back. Anyway, OJ Howard, I am taking the Panic elevator all the way to the penthouse. We're going to 10 on OJ Howard. I am very scared about him going forward.
First 10 of the day.
First 10 of the day.
No, I got you with a 10 on Chris Carson.
That's right.
Oh, never mind.
But it was balanced by our ones. This one, everybody's over 5 here, but I'm very scared about OJ Howard. I own him, and it still hasn't been good. I mean, you drafted, like, you jumped for OJ Howard. You could have taken probably a flex player, maybe a very good kind of solid role player, maybe even a wide receiver 2, running back 2, instead of taking OJ Howard in the draft. Yet you sprung for this guy who put up a total goose egg in week 2, and other than that has put together a combined 15 fantasy points. It's just absurd. Why? It's ridiculous. And it doesn't seem like it's getting any better, despite the fact that he scores 9 points against the Giants of all teams. That's really not good. And I'm very scared. I think you can't drop him, as Bryce said, because you invested too much draft capital in him, but that's why I'm so panicked about this. OJ Howard is very scary to me. Thankfully, in this league, I drafted Darren Waller, but we also have 2 flex spots, so OJ Howard still may see the light of day because my team is pretty much trash other than that. But very scared about OJ Howard going forward but I think the real reason, as Bryce said, I think 2 episodes ago, is that Bruce Arians really isn't using him in the offense at all. He doesn't use tight ends in the offense, and we all had thought that might change because OJ Howard's very talented, but it just doesn't seem to be the case so far in the Bucks scheme. So very panicked about OJ Howard.
Mike, this isn't very economics of us. We're both econ guys. What about sunk cost? Yeah, you used a 5th round pick. Dump him.
I know, but you drafted him in the 5th round for a reason, I guess. You had some hope, some glimmer of hope.
I know. No, I'm still keeping him on the roster. He's got too much upside. That offense passes too much to not keep him at least around.
Yeah, great.
Because if you cut him loose, he'll get picked up.
Yeah, he'll be back eventually. I just don't know when that'll be, and I don't know where he'll finish this season. I don't see him as a top 5 guy, but we'll see. And so that wraps up episode 6 of Between the 20s. Just want to give a quick thank you to Mike and Bryce for joining me today. We gave you guys some info. Hopefully all that stuff was useful. Had some quick debates on these guys. So check us out on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook. Have a good weekend, guys. Thanks for watching.